Welcome back to Unleash the Goats, where we unleash ourselves upon the Star Wars franchise with reckless abandon, and nobody quite knows what we'll say next. Least of all us. I'm Nat, she, her. Sugar, say hi.
Hi, I'm Sugar, she, her.
Angela, say hi.
Hi, I'm Angela /Faye, she, her.
I switched it up on you.
No!
None of us were prepared.
None of us were prepared. It's because Sugar's next to me on my little screen.
It worked out this way. All right. I'll start off our brief introduction into what we're talking about this month. So this is actually part 1 of our villain character discussion. We realize there's quite a lot of fucking villains in Star Wars across the years, so we split it up a little bit. And this month we're talking about specifically villains who are connected to Anakin as a character, sort of thematically. Because a lot of the antagonists and villains in the Skywalker saga in particular tend to be foils or parallels for Anakin, or they're there to highlight things about Anakin's character, specifically about his descent into villainy and his position as a villain. And also just sometimes because Anakin's story is where we find the theme of the Skywalker saga the most, all that stuff about the power of choice and selflessness versus selfishness, a lot of the antagonists and villains end up playing with the same theme, just kind of as a result of that being really important within the story. And so they just kind of fall into the same category, even if they're not specifically related to Anakin himself. We are including both antagonists and villains on this list. We are kind of defining an antagonist specifically as just someone who opposes the protagonist, and a villain as someone who is a little bit more explicitly morally wrong or evil. But there's obviously some overlap or back and forth between these two terms. You can have villain protagonists, and you can have an antagonist who is a hero or not super evil. So not everybody here is maybe what you might classify as a villain, but they are usually an antagonist of some sort in at least one story within Star Wars. They also don't always stay antagonists forever. For example, Anakin himself is a protagonist in one trilogy and an antagonist in another, so there's overlap here as well. We're being a little bit loose with some of our definitions. But yeah, so we're going to move on from there. We're going to go chronologically here and start with prequels and Clone Wars era villains.
Faye, do you want to tell us about how much you hate Palpatine?
I would love to tell you how much I hate Palpatine.
I know you've got opinions here.
He's the worst. The most annoying thing about Palpatine is that he's so fucking competent. It's genuinely so obnoxious. Like, I hate it when there's a story and it's like, oh yeah, the good guys are gonna do great, they're gonna win, and then Palpatine swoops in at the very end and he's like, no, you thought you won, but actually I'm gonna turn this to my advantage. And I'm like, fuck you.
I know, it's like
Screw
an Uno
you.
reverse card every time he shows up.
Every time. And I'm like, bro, can you not for like 5 seconds? I'm so glad you get chucked down a pit and then evaporated. Like, it's such a good ending for you because you're garbage.
And that is his ending. There's no other ending for Palpatine.
Okay, cool.
No, I said both of his endings. I said he got dropped on a pit and then evaporated.
I'm just going to assume that he got evaporated when he went down the pit.
Yeah.
He could get evaporated twice. That'd be great for me. I'd love if he got evaporated twice.
It's fine.
We don't know that he didn't.
I hope it hurt a lot. But we're talking specifically about villains in this episode about like that are parallels to Anakin, and Palpatine in particular. Well, he's not like his journey itself doesn't really parallel Anakin's. He's more of like the source of all of Anakin's problems, essentially. If we took Palpatine out of the story, then like Anakin would probably grow up like weird but fine. He'd probably leave Jedi Order and like go hang out in like some planet causing issues over there. Like, he'd be a obnoxious guy, but like he would be normal for the most part. He probably wouldn't be a villain if it wasn't for Palpatine, is what I'm trying to say. Palpatine is over here just like causing issues in Anakin's psyche and like making him be who he is. And for a lot of these villains, I feel like does a very similar thing where like he takes someone who would be weird but fine and turns them into a villain. And that's his whole thing. It's his entire job is causing other people misery. But an interesting thing about Palpatine is that we don't really get a lot about who he is as a person. Like, what does he like to do besides space opera? Like, where did he come from? Who were his parents like? What is his childhood like? We don't really know, and that's not really important for him because the only thing that matters about Palpatine is that he is evil, and there's no redeeming Palpatine. There's nothing redeeming. There's no redeeming qualities. There's no chance he's gonna come back to the good side ever because like that's just not who he is. He's more of a kind of nature than he is a person.
Yeah, all the things that make Faye hate Palpatine are the reasons I adore Palpatine.
As a character, I love him. He's fantastic. As a person, I despise
Obviously,
him.
yes. But, like,
Yeah.
I adore every time he comes in with that Uno reverse card. Like, it is...
Yeah, that is the thing. You like it when he shows up, and I hate it when he shows
Yeah,
up.
yeah. Like, I swear to God, my favorite moment in the entirety of the Bad Batch is, like, I think it's, like, Rio Chuchi and all of the clone rights people have come in, and they're like, we've won! We finally figured out how to take down, like, some admiral or whatever. And they're like, we're gonna get clone rights, it's gonna be great. Palpatine has been, like, MIA the entire fucking time. This has been, like, a 2-episode arc at least. And, like, he suddenly shows up. You know, I think they talk about how Palpatine very rarely comes to, like, Senate meetings anymore. And he like, ascends from from below, comes up, and he's like, bitch as you thought. And he's like, sure, take that admiral, I got you. But you know what? You're right. The clones are just too good at betraying people. Get rid of them. They are now all immediately fired. It's just like the worst thing in the world. So they got what they wanted and then immediately didn't. You know, and he turns it around on them. And it was like my favorite moment in the entire show was Palpatine coming in to ruin everybody's day, including all the heroes. And I like the heroes, but it was really funny. And, you know, I think my favorite like Clone Wars moment is when he comes in and fucks up Maul's ass. Like,
No, I do love that actually because I
that is very fun.
don't like Maul more than I don't like Palpatine, and that scene where he like just kicks Maul and Savage's ass, so fucking funny.
Perfection. And he's having so much fun doing it. I think that's what makes me like it, is that a lot of the other villains in Star Wars, because they follow Anakin in so many ways, have that complexity to them where like the dark side kind of makes them miserable.
For the tortured bad boy.
Yeah, Palpatine just is like having the time of his fucking life all the time. You know, he's like, I am going to kill this man and I'm going to love it. And then he does. And I just can't help but love that for him.
He is living his best life.
He is living his best life.
Just that he's doing terrible things to everyone else around him. But it's like he's not.
Yeah.
There's
he's
no
making
nuance to
sure
Palpatine.
everyone else is living their worst life.
Yeah.
Like, but on a more serious analysis note, Faye is obviously correct that he's not much of a character. Like, he is there to kind of just be a symbol, I think, more than anything, and a catalyst more than anything else, as opposed to, like, a character with, like, he's got motives, but they're very basic. You know, he kind of is just like, I want to see the world burn kind of character. There's not a lot of complexity to him, and so he's there, I think, to kind of be a representation of Anakin's temptations, right? Like, he is the dark side kind of incarnate in a lot of ways. I also think that, especially in the context of the prequels, he is our bad father, because obviously in the original trilogy, we talked about this with the Obi-Wan episode, there is this concept of a good father and a bad father, and Obi-Wan is the good father, Vader's the bad father. But then you get into the prequels, and Anakin cannot be his own bad father, so Palpatine is in there to kind of juxtapose against Obi-Wan then as the bad father. And so he has this kind of grandfatherly almost aspect to him where he's not sweet, obviously, but like very kind of giving this sense of kindliness towards Anakin, like, oh, my boy, I'll listen to you, and I'm gonna tell you all the things you want to hear.
Kind of caretaking. Like, he's very much like... A
little bit of caretaking, but it's not even quite that much, right? Because it's kind of like a grandparent would do in some ways, where it's like, well, it's not my kid, right? So I can just spoil this one, and, like, it's the parent's problem when they start throwing a tantrum. And so he's kind of intentionally encouraging that, but in a way that it just feels like he's just handing the kid a piece of candy, and when the sugar rush happens, it's Obi-Wan's fault. Obi-Wan's problem. And so there's...
But he tells the kid that he doesn't get cavities because Obi-Wan doesn't brush his teeth enough.
Yes,
that's why he's getting cavities. Not because he keeps eating candy.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like an interesting aspect of Palpatine there, that he represents the bad father in the same way that Anakin will later also represent the bad father. And I do think that that's interesting because we'll get into this more than once, because Palpatine is in the only character, perhaps, that is in all three trilogies.
D2. How dare you?
R2, yeah, true. The droids. That's true. Both droids. The Wookiee. Technically, Chewie is in all three.
Technically, Leia and Luke.
Technically,
are also
Luke and
in all
Leia.
three.
Okay.
Technically,
The only villain that is in all three.
you're
Okay.
correct. He is the only
The only
villain.
villain that crosses across three trilogies. So we will hit this a couple of times with Palpatine, but Palpatine, I like that he kind of represents just like the dark side incarnate, temptation, fear, pain, and all of that, as opposed to being a character in and of himself. And there's elements of that each time he comes back. But he is not the only character in the prequels era that works as like a parallel for Anakin. So we have a couple of others. So Maul obviously comes in as a Sith apprentice. And for very obvious reasons, the parallel is just there with Maul being a Sith apprentice to Palpatine, the same way Vader will later become a Sith apprentice to Palpatine.
This is like Anakin 1.0. This is before he like perfects his version. This is a child he kidnaps and tortures instead of like emotionally manipulating.
Right, which doesn't show up in anything except the comics, I think.
Book.
But
There's a book. It's like a diary style book.
right, so there is stuff about Maul that gets yes, Nat.
That's it.
That was it? Okay.
I'm learning things for the first time.
Yeah, okay, so for the uninitiated, there is some books or comics that kind of imply that Palpatine either kidnapped Baby Maul or was given Baby Maul by Mother Talzin, depending on which piece of media you read. And as a baby, I believe. He's a baby, I think, in both versions. Not newborn, but like within a year old or so.
Yeah.
And has basically been raising him since he was a baby, obviously has treated him terribly and tortured him into what we know him to be later in life.
Very tragic.
Very tragic. It's not something that obviously is there in The Phantom Menace, but it is something that has been brought into his character in other places, which continues more parallels with Anakin in terms of Palpatine grooming a child from a very young age into becoming a dark and twisted version of themselves. There is obviously an obsession with Obi-Wan.
Relatable though. I also obsessed with Obi-Wan.
True, but you are not obsessed with killing him. Or his loved ones.
That's true.
Which is something that obviously Anakin ends up with to some degree as well. And I kind of put in here that there's almost this obsession with Obi-Wan as a proxy for Palpatine, because they can't really go after Palpatine because Palpatine is in their heads, for one, but also too much. Like, he is too frightening, too scary to try to go up against, so they don't, but they can, like, pin all of their blame and pain and frustration onto Obi-Wan as sort of a safe nemesis for them to have. Because Obi-Wan, I mean, he will fight back, obviously, but he's not specifically out to get them in the same way that Palpatine is, and he's not going to hurt them just for the sake of hurting them the way that Palpatine would. And then there is Savage, which we will talk about simply because he is brought in as an aspect of Maul's character. There's not a lot of parallel between Savage and anything in Anakin's life, unless you want to try and compare this to his relationship with Ahsoka, because Maul kind of tries to take Savage on as an apprentice, but it doesn't work super well.
What's interesting about like Maul and Savage is that they both have this awful story where they don't really get to choose where they're going with their life. Like, they don't really have a turning point at any point where they could have chosen differently and it would have been in character for them. Whereas a lot of the other people on the list, like Dooku and Ventress, are in a similar path as Anakin, where they have multiple points where they could have chosen differently and it would have been either way. It was a knife's edge. They could have gone either way and they decided to choose evil. And I like that parallel where you have like these people who are manipulated by Palpatine, but not all of them have the same opportunities and same like level of choice. And it's interesting to see who Palpatine chooses to give that choice to and who he takes it away from.
I do think with Maul, what's interesting is that in the prequels, obviously within the actual prequel trilogy, we do not know enough about him to talk about whether he has choice or not, but through all other media, he obviously is shown to have not had any choice up until Phantom Menace. But you could argue that he's kind of freed from Palpatine afterwards, and so the whole time that he's in Clone Wars, and then into Rebels, that he has an opportunity to kind of make a change to his own life. He's given a brother, right? Like, he has someone that he could care about, and that he does care about to some level, but that he can't really quite let go of his own darkness enough to make that connection. That's one of the things that is more interesting about Maul in the context of the Clone Wars, is that he has this freedom from Palpatine's reach, right? That he's served his purpose now. He's died. He can go on and do literally almost whatever he wants, up to a point. Obviously, he gets too powerful, and Palpatine is going to come in and smack him down. But, like, he gets pretty far on his own, without Palpatine giving him any notice at all. And, like, Savage is still there. He is trying pretty hard to connect to Maul, and Maul is constantly just, like, treating him like dirt, you know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, like, he has the choice there. He does actually have a choice there, more than Savage ever gets.
Well, I mean, it's more of, like, he doesn't have any positive influences to give him another choice. He would have to go find them himself.
Right, aside from Savage himself, who is trying to create a more positive connection between the two of them.
Yeah, but even Savage is, like, very much twisted with this dark magic and stuff, and, like, didn't seem to grow up super great. So, like, even then, like, the most you get is a neutral influence, where he's trying to pull him more towards, like, a neutral side, which is better than what he's doing, for sure.
What he's doing, but, like, even, like, there's moments where Savage is like, oh, cool, we got onto this ship, let's just take the money. And Maul is like, no, let's kill everybody and get the information so I can keep going to hunt down Obi-Wan. And Savage is like, oh, man.
He's like, I don't care about Obi-Wan. Why do we care about Obi-Wan?
Yeah, he's just like, can we, like, let this go already? And Maul is like, no. You know? So, like, he has options here through this relationship with Savage. And he could even create a positive relationship with Savage. Even if the both of them are being evil together, the relationship itself could be positive, theoretically. But he never lets it get there. And it's just interesting to look at Maul through that context, that he is kind of the only character who ever gains that level of freedom from Palpatine, where it's like, because he died and then got brought back, you know, it's like he's no longer important to this narrative. And so he kind of can do whatever he wants, and he just chooses not to, because that's kind of who he is.
Well, interestingly, Ventress does get the same freedom. She makes a very positive change in her life. She works with Ahsoka. Like, she was also she wasn't manipulated by Palpatine himself, but she was manipulated by Dooku. Palpatine did order her death, but she manages to get out of it and leave entirely. She does die in, like, a book, but that's not high canon.
She's been brought back. She ain't dead anymore.
Yeah, that's true. She's not dead anymore. So, like, I think Ventress is, like, a really interesting one here too, because she has way more positive influences in her life, because she was raised by a Jedi for a time and taught very good things, whereas Maul, the most positive influence he has is Savage. And so when they end up hitting that freedom point and they can do whatever they want, Ventress ends up very neutral and just kind of, like, is a free agent, whereas Maul is still evil. Like, he's still pretty much on the Sith side, even though he could do whatever he wants, like you said.
Yeah, he claims not to be in Rebels. He claims he's, like, no longer Sith, just Maul, but, like, he's also still looking for a Sith apprentice, you know? Like,
It's true.
and acting very evil. He doesn't like the Inquisitors much, but,
I mean,
you know.
we should mention that in his death, he is happy at the thought of Palpatine dying, but, you know, Palpatine sucks, so, you know, it's not really a high bar.
Yeah. So we have bounced around a little bit here. We hit Ventress a little bit. She obviously does have those parallels to Anakin through having had some level of Jedi training, and then lost the Jedi Master. So she had a loss of someone who's very important to her, and that she probably saw as some level of a parent figure. And also she was a slave for a good portion of her childhood. She actually was also either given away or stolen from Dathomir, much like Maul. Unclear which one. But, and then spent a period of time as a slave before something happened, and I think she got freed or escaped, and ends up meeting this Jedi Master who takes her in for a while and trains her up for unclear amount of time before something happens and he dies. And this loss of the really only positive influence in her life pushes her into darkness. So she actually isn't manipulated into it by Dooku. Like, she's already chosen to be dark, and she seeks Dooku out for further training in being a Sith. But that she kind of loses herself to that darkness in a similar way to Anakin after Shmi. So she has that obvious connection to Anakin. She does have that connection to these Night Sisters, obviously, but we're going to discuss the Night Sisters a little bit more in general in our next episode, because the Night Sisters as a group don't really have any connection to Anakin. Ventress herself does.
We're going to talk about how they butchered the Night Sisters. That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we will talk about the different variations of the Night Sisters that currently exist. It's interesting that they kind of put those onto Ventress, because I honestly don't feel like they've impacted her character all that much. Like, she has a couple of episodes with them before they all get killed off. Spoiler alert for that, if you're somehow unaware. But the Night Sisters all got killed off, and she's the only survivor at the time. There are at least 2 others now that we have been made aware of. And she really never talks about them again. You know, even in her later Clone Wars episodes or the Bad Batch stuff that she showed up in, there really is no connection there. And the 2 other survivor characters that we have met, Marin from Jedi Fallen Order and Morgan Elspeth from the Mandoverse, no connection between those characters and Ventress at all. And so there's no real connection, I think, between Ventress and the Night Sisters that feels particularly interesting to me, because it just doesn't continue to be an influence on her moving forward. And then the last prequel character that we need to talk about, who I think is a parallel for Anakin, is actually Grievous. Lovely, wonderful General Grievous, who is a cyborg. For obvious reasons, there's a connection to Anakin, who is more machine than man by the original trilogy. I know that there is a Legends backstory for Grievous that is a little bit more sympathetic, but the canon backstory for Grievous is that he basically got very jealous that he wasn't taken in as a Jedi because he doesn't have Force sensitivity, because fuck the Mandoverse. That's not how Force sensitivity works. Grievous does not have it. He gets very upset by this and decides that in order to try and one-up the Jedi, he's going to keep kind of replacing his body with machine parts to try and grant himself Jedi-like abilities. And then becomes the character that we see in the show and films, where he is got eyes and what appears to be lungs and maybe a heart. And that is about all that's left in him that isn't machine.
Got a cardiovascular system.
A cardiovascular system. Yeah, something. He's got something in the chest cavity there, obviously.
It's a big system to work some machine around. That's really impressive. Good for him.
I know.
Honestly, the fact that his lungs are just like hanging out in the air, pumping, is creepy. I don't like it. That's not how lungs work, for the record. They need to be in fluid. They need to be suspended. Mm-hmm. Anyways.
And this is the part that you have a problem with, to be clear.
It's the part where it doesn't make sense. They should at least like be in like a sack or something.
Yeah.
Why are they like that?
You.
Because it's space.
Yeah.
Also, why is his trachea broken? You can fix a trachea. Why does he breathe like that? It's
maybe because his lungs are out. I don't know.
It's to intimidate people.
Well, okay.
Which you would think he doesn't need. He has a lot of lightsabers that he's holding. Like,
also, like, you'd think he would just replace the lungs. Like, also,
He
they can
hasn't gotten
clone
there yet.
organs. He could get new lungs if he wanted to. He just chooses to run around with these, like, awful hacking lungs for some reason. I guess he doesn't have any pain receptors because he has an organic brain. He doesn't have an organic brain anymore, but still.
but does he? Is it maybe because Vader has a talking thing? That's the way that you should describe that. But like Vader has a very specific kind of robotic
Oh yeah, I could see
way of
that.
talking. Maybe they gave that to Grievous.
I feel like there was a reason he had the cough, the kind of raspy voice. I feel like there was a reason that got put in there in Revenge of the Sith, and I do not remember. But I feel like it was supposed to be, in some level, kind of showing that he still has some sort of humanity left, that he isn't just another droid. And so if he's coughing, it's like he's done all this to kind of build himself up, but that it is not healthy.
The canon reason is that Maul crushed his chest plate, and that's why he coughs.
Oh, that's very funny.
Maul?
Yeah. In the fight that Maul has with him in the O3 Clone Wars, he crushes his chest plate, giving him a cough. And they decided to keep that in the theatrical film.
Wait, is Maul
Do you
in
mean
O3 Clone
Mace?
Wars?
Yeah.
Do you mean Mace Windu?
Yes, I do
Okay.
mean Mace Windu.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're both sitting
Because
here like,
I'm reading
Maul?
Mace, I'm like, those are
Why
different
are there
characters.
so many M names in this world.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's why. Because Mace crushed him, and they thought that was a cool shot. And they're like, hey, what if that gave him lung problems in the movie? Boo-boo. And then that's what they did.
I love that sometimes they just are like, yeah, let's make that decision.
Why not? Yeah.
Why not?
It's cool.
Anyway, he's a really bitter character. It's awesome.
He's very bitter. He's very jealous a lot of the time. He kind of gives up his personhood and turns into someone who kills a lot of Jedi. There's some obvious parallels to Anakin here. And that is pretty much it for the prequels and Clone Wars villains.
In the originals, there are more.
The originals, and we're going to hit the Imperial era in general here, so we're not just going to stick to what's in the original trilogy, because that was hard for me. Sorry. As the writer, I was having trouble figuring out how to order everything, so we are just considering this the Imperial era. So it basically starts from Order 66 and kind of goes forward from there.
Who would you like to hit first?
Well, we can just start with Palpatine again. Why not just start with Palpatine in each era?
I like it. Like, I feel like in the original era, Palpatine is more like, he's even more removed than he is in, like, the prequels. And, like, he's more of, like, a looming darkness that Anakin wants to overcome in order to, like, be in charge with his son, essentially. And ultimately, he can't overcome on his own. We know that from, like, the second movie when, like, we're really still getting to know Palpatine, is that, like, this is an evil that Vader cannot conquer on his own, and he needs Luke to help him with. And it's something that Luke has to overcome, the temptation to be like Palpatine and to join Palpatine. He has to overcome that before Anakin can overcome that and actually defeat Palpatine. And it's really interesting to see that, like, in these movies, or this era, I guess, like, he's less of, like, a personal parallel for Anakin and more of, like, an obstacle and a temptation for his son, who he's being strongly paralleled against.
Yeah, Palpatine in this era becomes even more of a symbol, right, for darkness, temptation, selfishness, pain, destruction, anger, whatever. And he's utilized more than once. Like, in the trilogy, he's used primarily for Luke, but he pops up for Ezra as well on Rebels.
One thing that I have always found interesting is that, like, we have that line, right, in the first one that you quoted earlier about, like, how Obi-Wan says that Anakin is now more machine than man. And yet he is less evil than Palpatine, who is 100% organic, has no, like, machine parts. Like, he is more evil than all these other people who we see having, like, prosthetics and things, because, like, ultimately, the real evil is just who you are as a person, not what you have as part of your body.
Right, and the thing with that line, I know people have pointed it out as being potentially ableist, right? That the idea that, like, having fewer body parts makes you evil somehow. But I feel like the line, and obviously I don't have a George Lucas quote for this one, it's not just that Anakin is made up of prosthetic metal parts, but that Anakin is sort of choosing to give up his personhood in a more metaphorical sense. And it is visually implied by the prosthetics, which is its own potentially ableist, symbology, but that what Obi-Wan means is more that he's choosing to act like a machine. In many ways. And the same is true for Palpatine, that even without the loss of limbs and the need for a life support suit, that he is also kind of more machine than man, because he is choosing to basically just be a machine of evil, which is why he can keep coming back and being the same exact temptation each time he comes back. Is because that's all he is.
Palpatine, like, is the Imperial machine. Like, they call it, like, a war machine and stuff. Like, that is what we call it. And there's nothing that personifies that more in the Star Wars universe than Palpatine himself, who runs everything. Like, he is responsible for the whole thing. He is the Imperial machine.
Yes.
Who is these people? I don't know them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you don't. So I'm going to have to take this section. So...
Tell us about these characters.
Yeah, so the next 4 characters, which I promise I will make brief, are all from the Cal Kestis games Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. In particular, Terran Malicos, who I've actually got in the middle here, is from Jedi Fallen Order. He is a fallen Jedi who's actually gone to Dathomir, and kind of basically taken up root there, and has basically completely gone over the dark side. He kind of manipulates Cal a little bit. He's been manipulating the surviving Night Sister in this game. Her name is Marin. We'll get to her in a second. Into basically teaching him how to utilize the dark side powers that the Night Sisters had, so that he can do whatever. His actual end goal is a little unclear, but he also has actually convinced Marin that the Jedi caused the Night Sisters' genocide. When, for the uninitiated, if you have not seen Clone Wars, the truth is that Dooku sends Grievous to kill all of the Night Sisters. The Jedi have exactly nothing to do with it. It is basically a response, I think, to Ventress's attempts to kill Dooku.
They have less than nothing to do with it. Like, they don't even know what happens.
Yeah, they have nothing to do with the Night Sisters ever at all, aside from the one time that they go and get information. But because Grievous was running around with a bunch of lightsabers, and Marin was a child at the time, she is pretty easily able to be convinced that the Jedi caused her own genocide. And so there is this element of, like, he's trying to convince Marin to give him power and give him the Night Brothers as an army, so that he can go out and kill more Jedi. Yes. And then, Dagan Gera is actually... I'm cheating a little bit with Dagan Gera, because Dagan Gera is technically a Jedi from the High Republic era. But he is, like, frozen in time, and he gets unfrozen into the Imperial era, so I'm counting him in there. He, if I can remember Dagan Gera's storyline, he basically was a Jedi who was dealing with the problems that were happening in the High Republic era, which I'm not going to get into, but there was this foe that they were dealing with that was very powerful. He started getting really worried and scared, and ended up kind of falling in an attempt to sort of come up with a solution to the problems that they were dealing in the High Republic era. He gets accidentally unfrozen, or sort of intentionally unfrozen, but before they realize that he's an evil bastard, into Cal Kestis's era, 10 years into the Imperial period, and becomes a temporary problem that they then have to take out. So he just has the kind of fallen Jedi because he loses himself to his own fears parallel. And then there is Bo Dakuna, who I have more than once described as Anakin Light. He is a Jedi who survived Order 66, and escaped somewhere, managed to find a woman, fell in love, they got married, they had a kid. He is discovered by some Imperials, the wife is murdered. Bode is able to escape with his daughter, but they are hunting him down, and he kind of believes that he doesn't really have any ability to fight back. So instead of trying to continue to run or fight, he turns around and makes a deal with the Empire, where effectively he will help hunt down people for them, in exchange for them not killing him or his daughter. In the game, he joins Cal's rebel group of sorts, pretending to be with them. Cal has no idea that Bode used to be a Jedi. Later on, Bode ends up selling Cal and his friends out to the Empire, leading to a massive destruction of people, a base, archived information that was saved from, like, the Jedi temples, a number of things. And the death of Cal's mentor at the time at Vader's hands. And the explanation is basically that he, wanted to escape the Empire, and Cal's rebel group had found a way for that to happen, but Bo did not want to share it. because he was too scared that if too many people had access to it, that the Empire then would also manage to have access to it, and so he wanted to restrict it to effectively himself and, like, one or two other people. And so he destroys everyone else so that he can run off and take advantage of this escape himself. Cal has to run him down, and it does not go well for Bode. And I think what's most interesting to me about all of these three characters is that none of them ever really get any redemption. They all have to be killed in the end. But it's not like Palpatine, where, like, there is no possibility of redemption, as much as it is just, like, not everyone can be saved. Some people are just gonna stick to their guns here, even when you offer them a chance for a better life, offer them the opportunity to be better. Even when there's a loved one begging them to be better, sometimes they're just not going to make that choice. Not everybody is going to turn around at the last 11th hour like Anakin does. And I find that kind of interesting about them in that way. And the last one I will talk about so that I can get this over with is Merrin, who I mentioned earlier. She's a Night Sister survivor. She becomes a protagonist by the end of the first game, but she is an antagonist for a short minute. And what I find interesting about her as a parallel to Anakin primarily is that she is someone who was very young and got kind of manipulated by a Darksider at a young age into giving him more power and access to her resources out of the pain and fear and grief that she was feeling, and that it causes her to start to become not evil. She's never really evil. She is effectively defending what she, her home from someone she believes to be an enemy. But she also does not give Cal a lot of chances to explain himself at all. And she does effectively set loose a bunch of zombies on him.
Sure.
Because this is a thing that the Night Sisters can do. So she let loose a bunch of zombies to try and defend her home. She doesn't listen to him very much until a lot later. And I just think that there's an interesting parallel there for Merrin about how she was preyed upon by a Darksider, but that she is actually able to turn herself around by the end and realizes that she's been manipulated and chooses instead to listen to Cal and get to know him and understand that he isn't what she thinks he is. And becomes a hero and a rebel, and, by the second game, they are in a romantic relationship with each other. And it's very sweet, and she's actually... literally enemies to lovers, and it's actually very sweet. They actually have a really cute relationship. And she gains so much more control over her magic and stuff as a result. Even though, like, the Night Sisters are implied to basically be explicitly utilizing Darkseid powers to some degree in order to create their magic, it isn't actually using the Darkseid in the way that Sith do. It's weird. They live in this kind of strange little gray area here of where their magic actually comes from. But it isn't inherently pulling on darkness and evil and pain the way other things do. They're kind of siphoning out of it. In a little different way, so she can gain more powers and not go evil. And that is the end of my spiel on the Cal Kestis games. So we're going to go into the Inquisitors now.
Are the Inquisitors the one with, like, the cool double-sided lightsabers that have, like, the circle in the middle?
Yes, they are.
Okay, cool.
They're sick.
I have seen them in the Kenobi show.
Yep.
And I think maybe there was one in the Ahsoka show.
There is one in the Ahsoka show. He is technically a zombie.
Sure. But he has the lightsaber.
He was presumably an Inquisitor that Morgan zombified.
Yeah. Because I first was introduced to them in the Ahsoka show, I think, which is so tragic, honestly, that happened for literally any kind of character. I know nothing about the Inquisitors. I know that they're bad.
They are supposed to be bad.
And that's it. Because they have red lightsabers, therefore they're bad.
They are on the side of the Empire and the Sith. They are not officially Sith, but they are Darksider characters working for Sith. They are introduced in Rebels. So I will give,
Great.
I guess, an even quicker spiel. So the Inquisitors were introduced in Rebels as obstacles in Season 2, antagonists in Season 2, so that they didn't have to keep using Darth Vader the entire time. There's really not a lot of nuance to them. They basically just run around causing problems for Kanan and Ezra, but they are kind of a little bit of like a parallel for Kanan and Ezra in terms of like, these are the good guys and here's some kind of mid-tier bad guys for them to go up against, effectively.
Well, the Inquisitors actually go back further than that, because the Inquisitors are based on the Emperor's hands in Legends, which is Mara Jade. But there's more than one just Mara Jade, but Mara Jade considers herself the only Emperor's hand, and she finds out later that she was not. There's multiple of them. So these are children in the Legends. These are children that are Force sensitive, that are kidnapped, that are trained up to be essentially tools of the Emperor for him to move around, and like are trained in Force sensitive things, lightsabers, etc. Mara in particular is like his favorite, and so like that's like where that kind of comes from. But then when they did Rebels, they took that concept of the Emperor stealing children and then raising them to be Force sensitive tools of his own, and made them into the Inquisitors, and used that to kind of like funnel ex-Jedi, etc. into like not mini Vaders, but kind of like mini Vaders, like, so they have some cool people with lightsabers for their protagonists to fight, which is really interesting because they're very like kind of one note a lot of the time. You don't get a lot of details about them, but their backstories are all super tragic, and you don't really learn a lot about it until Kenobi, when you get more about like Reva and what happened to her,
well,
and more of the dynamics.
It actually started, that bit started before that, because that also comes from the Jedi Fallen Order game. But the thing with them being former Jedi does not come out of Rebels. That's never implied in Rebels. There's no connection.
Isn't the main guy in Rebels, the main Inquisitor guy, isn't he the one who used to be a temple guard?
He is now, but that's never explained in Rebels. That's a thing that I think came out of comics. But none of the main three or four Inquisitor characters that we actually meet, including the Grand Inquisitor, are ever actually explicitly stated to be former Jedi. They do steal Force-sensitive children, but they aren't actually ever told to be Jedi. There is Rebels does have the, like, weird vision that Kanan has of the Grand Inquisitor as a temple guard, but I don't know if that's supposed to be explicitly like, yes, this is what he used to be, or if it's just like, this is the vision that he is having, and like a weird overlapping connection that Kanan makes with the Grand Inquisitor and other stuff. It's never explicitly stated. There is this vision, but it's not as discussed in the way that it is later on. They really are like Vader's dogs and not a lot else. That's kind of the point, is that they are there to just be like his little, sort of Jedi killers that he sends out to help him kill Jedi. But then, yes, we get to the Cal Kestis games, specifically Jedi Fallen Order, where the Inquisitors actually feel like a lot bigger of a threat. Cal goes up against them quite a lot, and they are very strong, very lethal. There is the more explicit connection to them having been former Jedi, usually either young knights or Padawans of some kind. And this is where you get the tragedy of them. The Inquisitors are not tragic by any means in Rebels. Like, nobody cares when they die. Most of the ones that get killed off, aside from the Grand Inquisitor, die in, like, really chump deaths. Like, think like Boba Fett getting knocked out by a blind guy kind of chump death. Like, it's very ridiculous, it's very silly kind of death. They're not tragic. Whereas the Inquisitors in Jedi Fallen Order bring in Trilla Siduri, specifically, who is a Padawan that ends up getting captured and has been turned into second sister, I think. And they all call themselves sister or brother of some kind, and a name, a number. So it's like second sister, third sister, fourth brother, whatever. And so on and so forth. Some of them, like the one from Ahsoka, seems to have a normal name, and we never know what Barriss is ever called. But regardless, most of the ones we have ever known come with a number and sister or brother. But like Trilla is angry at her master for having betrayed her. She feels a lot of pain, and there is the implication at the end that, like, you could pull her out of this, that, like, she is not irredeemable or unsavable. And then she's immediately killed by Vader, and we never see her again. But that's where that kind of comes, and that leads directly into what we see in the Kenobi show with Reva.
Love Reva.
Love Reva.
Who is one of our favorite characters to date, especially to come out of the Disney era.
Would you like to talk about Reva, Natalie, since you know Reva?
I know Reva. I remember meeting Reva and going, oh, why have I waited so long to watch this show? I mean,
Watch it for nothing else. Watch it for Reva.
Yes. Yeah. And it's worth it. She's fascinating. There's obviously the parallels for, like, a lot of these characters, right? Of, like, having the initial, like, good influence as a child and then lose that and be pulled into the dark side and, like, groomed into the dark side. But Reva always feels like she is making decisions for herself, which I think is kind of, like, different than, like, it's not quite the same beats as Anakin, right? Because Anakin is like, here are these people that I'm attached to, and Reva's like, here's the, like, vengeance that I'm seeking, and this, like, hunting Jedi is a way to do that, but she does not ever... She feels, maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like she was being manipulated less than Anakin. It's just like she got to this position where she has this power, and then, like, spoilers for Kenobi, but, like, by the end, it's like she, like, it really feels like she's gonna start making different choices, which Anakin never does until, like, the very end of the original trilogy. That's what I have to say about Reva. I got distracted because she's so beautiful, and I was thinking about how beautiful she is.
No, I like that a lot, because I think you're right. I think Reva in particular feels like she is doing these decisions for herself. Like, she is not taken in by anybody else's lies or manipulations about her. She knows what she wants, and she's going after it. But, like, not necessarily in a good way, but not really in a bad way either. Like, other people don't really come into her choices. Like, she's not making these decisions because she cares about other people, or she wants to, like, keep someone else alive, or has an unhealthy attachment to somebody. She's making these choices because that's what she needs. And when she figures out that that's not actually what she needs, she changes what she's doing. Mm-hmm. When she realizes that revenge is not going to get her to where she wants to be, she stops going after her revenge. Whereas, like, Anakin, everything is driven by, like, what he can take from other people. Reva's trying to give to herself, and what she's giving to herself is bad. But once she figures that out, she changes what she's doing.
Yeah, it feels like she is less motivated by, like, anger and hatred than Anakin is. Like, Anakin gets very wrapped up in his own emotions, and Reva, like, loses her shit a couple of times, but it does feel like she is making choices very, like, rationally and not driven by her emotions as much.
I'm sure I'd agree with that, but...
That's so fair, Sugar. You can tell me I'm wrong.
I mean, like, she is calmer than Anakin tends to be. Obviously, Anakin loses his shit a lot, especially when he's Anakin and not Vader. He's obviously a little bit more forced into calm as Vader, because he can't lose his shit quite as spectacularly, at least not in the same way. But Reva, I think, is completely caught up in her emotions, but her emotion is in a lot of ways, it's grief. Right? And she is angry. She's angry a lot. She spends the entire thing angry. She's angry at Obi-Wan, and she's angry at Anakin.
But that's very directed. Yeah, it's like a narrower path than Anakin, who's angry at everything all the time.
Angry, that's true. Like, I think she's less angry at the world, but she's taking it out on everybody. She chops off a woman's hand for no particular reason than to make a statement. And she does help kill another Jedi, and, like, there is obviously a contradiction between the motive, which is that she is angry that her Jedi family was murdered, so she's gonna go out and murder more Jedi. Like, there is a massive contradiction in what she claims her motivation is and what she's actually doing. And that's absolutely the point, right? Is that, like, her grief over what she lost is causing her to take it out on everyone else, because she's so consumed by what is an attachment to dead people that she is incapable of doing anything but finding that revenge. Like, she's let herself be so consumed by pain and grief and anger that it doesn't matter what happens to anyone else, because the only way she can handle all of those feelings is to get revenge on, specifically on Anakin. but yeah, obviously by the end, like, she's not irredeemable. She is not incapable of being saved or of stopping, any more than Anakin is. And Reva, more than almost anyone else, is a very direct parallel to Anakin. More than almost any of these other characters we've discussed, where they, like, have kind of a fairly loose parallel to Anakin. Reva is so much there to be like, this is what Anakin could be, right? Like, this is the choice he will ultimately make, but he isn't gonna make it now. You know, like, that's sort of the whole point of Reva in so many ways.
Which is interesting, too, because, like, it's also part of showing that, like, this is a choice that Anakin can make kind of at any time. He is not, like, bound to his choices the way that some people perceive him as being. Like, he's not trapped. He can make the choice that Reva's making at any point in his life, and he doesn't choose to make it until he has Luke standing in front of him, like, literally dying. Like, that's when the choice, like, finally comes, which is also interesting, and because that's when Reva makes her choice.
Luke,
because when they come to face with Luke, like, being injured and dying, like, that's the choice that ends up, like, breaking them and, like, bringing them back, is this innocent person who doesn't deserve it, had nothing to do with what happened to them. Like, that's what brings them back. It just takes a lot longer for Anakin because he's an idiot.
Anakin is also, like, Reva's journey is, like, a smaller scale, obviously, because it's not, like, the main story. And so while Anakin's choices affect the entire, like, galaxy in a way, Reva has, like, a much smaller, like, circle of influence.
Sphere of influence, yeah.
Yeah.
She does. She is a smaller story, but she is there explicitly as a parallel for Anakin. Among a number of other things. She obviously is also, like, the catalyst for that entire storyline. She moves that plot forward. She's also supposed to be paralleling Obi-Wan, and she has to be her own character, and she does all of it brilliantly. And the Kenobi show does not get enough credit for how well done Reva is. But yeah, Reva is incredible in so many ways.
Would you like to talk about Barriss?
Sure. So I was not planning on watching Tales of the Empire, but Faye told me I might like it. I didn't, but I have now seen it, which means I can talk about it.
I thought you would. I thought it was sweet.
I know you did. I understand why you thought that, but no.
But you were wrong, and here's Sugar is to tell you why.
There's enough stupidity in there that it was a problem. We're not really going to get into it, though. But obviously within Tales of the Empire, despite how stupid it's written, Barriss and Lynn, I guess, are both much like the other Inquisitor characters we have met so far with Reva and with Trilla. There is the implication here that both of them can't, not an implication, they explicitly do come back from their darkness, that this is a choice that they can and do make, which obviously has plenty of parallels to Anakin in all the same ways that it has before. There is also this theme of connection to and compassion for another person as a path back to selflessness, which is obviously, this is where Anakin gets his path back to the light, is through his connection to and compassion for Luke. I will say that for some reason they did decide to throw Anakin in as a cameo. He's in there for about half a second, and it has exactly no impact on Barriss whatsoever.
Don't worry, everyone. He looked hot.
Sure, yeah, for the half a second that you see him in. He shows up, he struts a little, he sits down, you never see him again. He doesn't even speak, as I recall. And, like, a lot more could have been done with that, and should have been done with that, especially given the connection that is there, personally, between Barriss and Anakin, and with Barriss's fall, which does not ever get addressed. Barriss obviously has her own fall into darkness a lot earlier, long before she becomes an Inquisitor in the Clone Wars, which we could discuss, but it's stupid and Islamophobic, so we're not gonna. Faye, do you have more to add?
A little bit, mostly just, like, Barriss coming back to her own was much more of, like, unlike Anakin and Reva, who both ended up needing, like, somebody else to bring them back to themselves, Barriss's journey was more of, like, an inevitability. Like, she was always going to come to this point. Like, as we see her, like, she starts questioning things immediately and, like, moving towards the light kind of on her own. And it's...
Which doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, but that's fine.
the parallel that I saw between Barriss and Anakin was Anakin's first fall and Barriss's fall have a lot of parallels because she does this awful thing, bombs the Jedi Temple, etc., etc. Anakin does this awful thing and massacres the Tuscans and is able to continue to be debatable, but to continue to be a Jedi afterwards and kind of continue to move forward and could have fully come back to the light if he had, like, not had a war and Palpatine and all of those other things happening. And, like, similar to that, Barriss has all this training that similar to Anakin that she has to fall back on and can move forward with. And once she's kind of in a place where she can make that choice and isn't, like, constantly under the thumb of the Inquisitors, she's able to make those choices. And if Palpatine hadn't been there, like, influencing Anakin, he could have made similar decisions. And that's kind of, like, more of the parallels that I've seen between them is, like, they both had this initial fall that they could come back from, like, it wouldn't be very hard to come back from, essentially. And then Anakin chooses to fall again, and she doesn't. She decides that she's not going to make that commitment again. She's going to come back and stick to her roots and be a Jedi, which I think I thought it was sweet. I thought it was well done.
You could argue she does, though, which the show fucks up pretty radically, but, like, she bombs the Jedi Temple, they put her away in prison, which gives her the chance to, like, reconsider some of her choices, and then she gets taken in by the Inquisitors, and she ends up killing a guy. She chooses to murder someone for her own survival. And then she never really goes anywhere from that. Like, there's no real exploration in terms of, like, she did choose to fall there. She chose to take that step to kill somebody, and then somehow by the next episode, she's just, like, a good person already.
Well, she doesn't go after him with the intent to kill him. She doesn't want to kill him.
No, she chokes him.
Her. Yeah,
he attacks her, but she kills him by the end. That's an active choice on her part.
Let me finish my thought, sugar. She doesn't choose to attack him. He attacks her. And I don't think it's fair for her. Yes, she does fall a little bit there because she does, like, murder him, but she is in a situation where she has to kill him or survive. And that's not the same thing as the choice that Anakin makes. Like, she is being forced into a corner here, and failing to survive does not make you evil. Does that make sense? Like,
it does, but I think, again, that this is something the show does badly, right? Because she uses the force choke to kill him, which is a very explicitly, like, if you're doing that, you're kind of...
I mean, Luke also does that. It's to a robot, but he does also do that. But no, he also does it to guards.
When does he force choke a guard?
He forces 2 guards to get into Jabba's temple. He doesn't kill them, but he does force choke them to get them out of his way.
Did he choke them, or did he just toss them?
No, he chokes them. Very explicitly, he comes into Jabba's temple, or palace, chokes the guards, they back up against the wall and pass out. They're not dead, clearly. And then he goes into the throne room. So, yes, force choke is usually evil, but it is not necessarily, it's not like lightning, where, like, it has to be from the dark side.
That's interesting. I don't think I ever noticed that he actually choked anybody. I also don't rewatch that movie very often.
You should! Return of the Jedi is fantastic.
Yeah, I know how much you love it. It's fine. I like the movie. I just don't usually feel the need to rewatch it a lot.
That's totally fair. But that was, like, my only thing. Is, like, I feel like she's more of a parallel to his first fall than his second. And there's a lot of parts of Anakin's story that get parallel to everybody, so...
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there is more interesting stuff in terms of her first fall that happens in the Clone Wars, but unfortunately that one is rife with racism.
It's so terrible. It could have been good, but it wasn't.
And so it's like, it was really stupid that it happened to Barriss at all, because there is absolutely no lead up to that fall on Barriss's end. It just kind of happens, and then there is no follow-up on that fall in Tales of the Empire. She just is kind of, like, pretty chill and flat throughout the entire thing, and then she's a healer 10 years later, and it's like, who cares? Nat, would you like to discuss Andor really quickly?
Yeah, my beloved Andor. What's fun about Andor is that, like, the bad guys that you meet are never, like, you don't watch them fall. They're just, like, there are no parallels there. It's just, these are already bad guys, who I never refer to by their names. Cyril, I always forget his name. He is just the greaseball to me. He spends the entire time convinced that he is the victim, that, like, he is trying his best to, like, do everything correctly when he's actually making terrible choices that are harming people. But whatever, he's working for the Empire. Is it the Empire at that point? It is, right? Okay, great. I'm really good at Star Wars, you guys. He could very easily, especially because, like, the choices that he's making are explicitly against orders. Like, he's fired, and he's like, I'm gonna continue doing this bad thing to hunt down this person because I think that I'm in the right. He's not. His girl who hates him, Dedra, the scary girl. Love her. Mm-hmm. I love a woman in power, especially in the Empire. I feel like we did not see very many women in power, which makes her much more sympathetic to me as a woman, because I'm like, oh, are you working so much harder because you're in a room full of men? And so you're, like, overcompensating by being extra evil? Maybe. She's also just, like, very dedicated and just like, no, I'm in charge here. And because I'm working for the Empire, everything I do is going to be bad. And honestly, good for her. That's all I have to say about her. You guys can jump in. I need to rewatch Andor.
Yeah. What I will say about Dedra is that they wrote her so intentionally, which I think was exquisitely done, that they do start her off as, like, a woman in a male-dominated field, right? That is intended to gain your sympathy until you realize that, no, she's just fucking fascist.
Yeah.
You know? And, like, and I think that that's what's really impressive about Andor and its two primary villains here, Cyril Karn and Dedra Meero, is that it does very intentionally choose to humanize these characters and show you their, like, day-to-day struggles, and give them, like, weird little flaws or things that cause you to connect with them, so that you can realize, like, they are making choices. Like, neither of them is forced into this. They are normal people, much like Anakin. Like, they have the choice to be better people. They absolutely could be. And they have things that make them tragic or sympathetic. You know, Cyril clearly grew up in a not so great household, you know, with, like, a very somewhat emotionally abusive mother. And, you know, that's so intentional. And I think that there is something there that does parallel to Anakin, where you don't see them fall, but you are seeing them make choices over and over again to be worse, you know, or to continue to be awful people when neither of them has to be. And that, I think, is so central to me in terms of the theme that Andor is getting at.
That's almost something that you don't see a ton of with Anakin, because you have the prequels where you watch him fall, and then, like, years ago, before Disney, right? When you cut to the original trilogy, like, he's already fallen, he's already there, and I feel like these characters in Andor are like, no, by the way, he has continued to make the choice to stay in this empire and to stay in power, even though you haven't watched him do that. Like, this is all a conscious choice that he's continued to make, and, like, he's just digging the hole even deeper, even if you don't see that happen.
Yeah, that's something I really do like about Andor, is that, and it, like you mentioned, this is something that Kenobi Show does as well, is it emphasizes that Anakin is making this choice every moment of every day, and he could be making a different one and is choosing not to. The one character I do want to touch on really fast before we run out of time, who we do see fall and reap the consequences of it, is my buddy Tim. Nobody's going to remember Tim because he's very minor and nobody liked him.
Nobody likes Tim?
But I feel like this is the point. Tim is an asshole.
Well, yeah, but, like, an asshole in the way that, like, people are sometimes assholes.
Well,
yeah.
To be
He's
fair,
not a fascist.
Not everybody is an asshole in the way that they will sell out somebody to the Empire so that they can get killed because he's a little jelly. Like, I'm sorry, but that is an extra level of asshole.
You're not wrong.
There's, like, an interesting parallel there with, like, Tim and over Cassian and Bix, and Anakin over Padme and
yeah,
Clovis.
Clovis or Padme and Obi-Wan, depending on how you read Revenge of the Sith. That, like, Anakin does feel very possessive of Padme, and that he kind of convinces himself into believing that he's doing it to protect her, right? And And I feel like Tim is doing the same thing with Bix, that he recognizes that Cassian is kind of getting her into something here, and that she's wandering off and doing things that he doesn't know about because she's not telling him, and he is worried about her. And there is a level to that that's genuine, that he's worried about her safety, but a larger part of it is that he's worried she's cheating on him. He is jealous. He's feeling possessive of this relationship in which he is insecure. And this causes him to lash out to try and get Cassian out of the picture, but he does so by literally selling him out to people who are going to kill him. And the consequence of this is that Bix gets captured and beaten, and in his attempt to go actually save her from that, he gets shot and dies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end of Tim Carlo. And, he very quickly reaps the consequences of his attachment, his selfishness, and his assholery. But that, Bix did genuinely love him, and originally he comes off as someone who's just kind of like a boy next door, right? He's a little bumbling, he's not particularly memorable. He seems like a steady, good guy, and that's why she likes him. Right up until he, becomes a jealous bitch.
He just kind of gives in to his jealousy.
You know why I loved him, though? Because that feels... It's part of why I loved Andor so much, because it's, such a... not down to earth, but just, that's such a relatable thing to be I'm feeling jealous in this relationship as humans feel jealous in our attachments to people. And so I'm gonna do something that will have consequences that are bad for everyone, seemingly maybe without thinking it all the way through. That is at a level that I feel is more relatable to, the general person than Anakin being I think that you're cheating on me with Obi-Wan, or you've betrayed me to Obi-Wan, so I'm gonna force choke you, even though you're my wife and very pregnant and I'm supposed to be protecting you. It's the same thing with Andor, of just the stakes are still very high, but more relatable to non-Jedi space ninja people. Space ninja is not the word I should have used. Continue.
No, you're not far off. It's space samurais, but that's
Thank
okay.
you.
Psychic space wizard samurais.
Yes.
But I think the thing that Andor does so well is it takes the exact same themes that we see in greater Star Wars stories, and it doesn't dumb them down or make them lesser, but it just goes what does this look like from a different perspective, from the perspective of someone without great cosmic power, right? You're seeing the same theme, the same idea of consequences for your own selfishness, where basically you get the opposite result, the exact opposite of what you were going for, and you basically cause the problem you were hoping to avoid. But you see it in someone who maybe feels more relatable because it is on such a much more small level, as opposed to the big fantastical level that you get with Anakin, where, he causes a, galactic, genocide in an empire, to rise with one choice, effectively.
I think, too, when you draw the parallels between them, you can also, make Anakin himself more relatable when you're, drawing these parallels between these very relatable characters and on, a smaller scale, and then Anakin on a bigger scale, because when you, Natalie was saying, when you bring it down, essentially what's happening is Anakin is jealous, and he's taking it out on his partner, which is a very common thing. That happens all the time.
Jealousy's scared, to be fair. He starts off scared.
Yes.
The jealousy gets added in second, but yeah.
Exactly. So, that's, a thing that people go through all the time, but, in the movie, it's so big and huge. And then when you draw this parallel down to Tim and Bix, you can see how it's more relatable to, the average person.
I think it's just, how is this exact same choice how does this choice look different depending on how much power you have in the situation? For Anakin, he's completely in control of the situation. For Tim, he's not. Mm-hmm. And Tim dies as a result.
You could argue that Tim is in control of his own choices, right? He's in control of that situation up until it wildly spins out of his control. And the same is true of Anakin, that Anakin is in control of his own choices right up until he isn't. Right up until things start spiraling a little bit out of control. And he basically decides, fuck it, point of no return, right? They try to hit something similar with Dooku in Tales of the Jedi. Not was well done, but this idea of, they don't like where it's gone, but now they feel like they're powerless and out of control, and so they should just, let it go at this point and continue down this road, because what are you going to do now?
They should have had a class on sunk cost fallacy in the Jedi Temple.
Yeah, well, you don't know they didn't. There's a
Well,
lot
if
of
they
things
did,
we know.
Dooku and Anakin failed that class.
Oh, for sure. But to be fair, we know Anakin learned a lot of the right things and decided to do his own shit anyway.
Yeah.
That's true.
Anakin was like, a fallacy, not for me.
Yeah.
I'm into
So-
women.
Wow. You broke now. Look what you've done.
I'm good.
I regret nothing.
We can talk about the sequels if we have to.
We do have
We
to.
can run through it pretty quick, but we said we would. So we're going to start with Palpatine again, because where else?
No, we're doing chronological order. Palpatine is not introduced first in the sequels. Thank goodness. It's Kylo Ren.
Okay, sure, we can do that. All right, so let's talk about Kylo Ren.
Do we have to? Okay, sorry.
Well, actually,
yes.
this is like one of the most interesting things about Kylo Ren.
Kylo does a lot of like staring at Vader's helmet. Like
He
there is
does.
no subtlety to them trying to draw the parallels. Not that there really ever is, but especially with Kylo.
Kylo Ren is one of those people who like never struggled in his life, and he wants to struggle so bad. He would love to be like, he's like a wannabe emo where he doesn't actually have anything to be emo about, but he like loves the aesthetic. And like he wants to be like the tortured evil Sith that Anakin is, and he has nothing to be tortured about, and he's just kind of like making it up. He's nuts. He should have been fine.
He should have been fine. Like, he was not groomed to the dark side. He had probably... Okay, I personally do not think that Leia and Han have any chemistry whatsoever, but that's a me thing. Like, he should have been raised in a very happy family with parents who love each other and love him. And, like, taken all of their good lessons about this is how we overthrew the Empire, and like gone out and done good and been light. And he was like, actually, fuck you. I'm tortured. I must be evil and kill my dad. And that's what I know about Kylo.
The thing I liked about Kylo in The Force Awakens was how he seemed very explicitly to be an anti-Anakin, right? In the sense that, like, they build him up as if he should have Anakin's trajectory. Leia talks about how he got manipulated by Snoke, or he must have been manipulated by Snoke, and there's still good in him, and he just needs his father's love, and he should be fine. There's tons and tons of intentional references to Anakin, and I feel like they're really not subtle about it because they want you to think he'll be fine. Right? Like, you just toss his father in front of him, and it was father-to-son love that saved Anakin. Maybe it'll be father-to-son love that saves Kylo. And then it absolutely doesn't. Right? And that's the whole hit behind that moment where Kylo kills Han, is that you think this is going to go well. Because it went well for Anakin and Luke.
Yeah.
So it should go well for Han and Kylo. And then it doesn't. And Kylo sticks to his fucking guns and continues to be evil afterwards. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about him, is that, like, Anakin struggled in life. Obviously, he had a rougher upbringing. He had opportunities to be better, but got manipulated and ultimately chose not to take any of those opportunities and became evil. But Kylo is the opposite. He had tons of opportunities to be a better person. They imply that he might have been manipulated, but it's not actually ever confirmed. That manipulation by Snoke actually happened. And so he is seemingly making active choices to be bad and isn't going to be saved. And I kind of wish they'd stuck to that. I think Adam Driver, I believe, did an interview recently where he said that Kylo Ren being redeemed was not actually originally part of the plan, as far as he was aware. And I wish they'd stuck to that, because I feel like that's really interesting to have him have the opposite trajectory from Anakin by design.
What's interesting is that, in actuality, Kylo is more closely following Palpatine's journey than Anakin's. Even though he's worshipping Anakin, has a decent childhood like Palpatine did, most likely. and then actively seeks out evil and is way more committed to being a Sith than Anakin ever really is, to be honest. Like, Anakin doesn't give a shit about being a Sith besides the fact that it gives him a purpose and, like, he gets to be mean and feel a little bit better. And, like, but Kylo, like, he loves that shit. Like, he's having fun with it. And, like, that's where him and Palpatine are way more similar. Even though he's, like, all about Vader, like, he's way more similar to Palpatine, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think Anakin does like power, but...
Yeah, they could have done way more cool stuff with bringing Palpatine back to show that parallel than they did, but, you know.
Which segues us so nicely into...
Yeah, so they brought Palpatine back, I guess.
For some reason.
They brought Palpatine back. I did sort of make an argument for Palpatine being brought back earlier, in that Palpatine is more of a symbol than he is a character, simply of darkness and temptation overall, which, you know, works in terms of the sense that, like, Rey has to undergo some of the similar problems that Luke had, right? Where they are all having to face their own darknesses and overcome them or succumb to them. So Palpatine coming back kind of works in the sense that, like, he is this perfect symbol. But also he was already dead, and he doesn't come back until the third movie, and this is not built up to at all.
It could have been done well.
It could potentially have been done well and better than it was. But, so you can make an argument for Palpatine coming back, but it was not executed well enough to work.
Tragically, yeah.
Also, I don't love Rey as Palpatine's literal granddaughter. I do think that that's weird. I'm not in love with this idea that, like, she could I mean, again, there is connections there in the sense that she has literal darkness in her blood via Palpatine's blood, in the same way that Luke had Vader's blood, and so there is this, like, oh, I have darkness in me, which means, you know, I have to overcome that. There is parallel there, but I think it feels a little lazy and redundant, and I don't think it's very good.
Yeah. That's another... I love not having watched the entirety of the sequels, because I'm like, wait, that's fake, though, right? Like, people are lying about that on the internet.
Never. If you hear something weird about the sequels, assume it's true.
It's just true. It's like, yeah, Palpatine's alive, and I'm like, that's a stupid headcanon, and it's like, no, that's real. It's a real thing.
But yeah, I think, like you were saying, like, there could be some really interesting stuff happening with Kylo's connection to Palpatine and how he, you know, has this weird vision of Vader in his head, but they ultimately end up serving the same master, and that Kylo kind of does finish the job Anakin started by becoming the Sith that Anakin stops being, you know, by becoming, the apprentice that brings Palpatine back, maybe, or something. But I feel like the whole Kylo redemption thing sort of fucks with that, as well as Palpatine being brought in late.
I mean, Kylo is kind of the apprentice that Palpatine always wanted, you know? Like, he's really
not
enthusiastic.
As powerful, though.
It's true, not as powerful, but he's, like, really gung-ho, like, he's really enthusiastic, he really wants to be there, like, you know, he's all the things that Palpatine wanted in an apprentice.
I mean, to be fair, Palpatine wants a broken apprentice, you know, like, he does really like that Anakin is, like, under his thumb, you know?
True.
Like, Kylo kind of wanting to be there, I feel like, is against what Palpatine sort of does want, because if he can keep the guy under his thumb, then he's not as dangerous. Because he's like, he needs Palpatine. Palpatine is his drug, whereas, like, Kylo kind of would not have. Not that you couldn't have gone that direction if you'd wanted to, but, yeah, I think you could have made an interesting connection between Anakin and Palpatine, where he worships Anakin, but Anakin ultimately, you know, breaks that connection. He ultimately decides he does not want it because it is unhealthy and toxic, and, you know, grasps for the last dregs of selflessness and compassion that he's got left, and Kylo does not follow that path, and they end up serving the same master, and so he never learns from Anakin's mistakes and falls down that same path and then cannot be saved. I think you could have had an interesting story there. I don't think they did it, though.
Shock.
No, super didn't, because they really wanted him to come back to the light, and that was ultimately their downfall, is that they wrote him like he shouldn't, and then they made him do it anyway.
Yeah. And that Palpatine got brought in because Snoke got killed too early.
Sure.
We'll touch on Snoke maybe next time.
Why not? Anyway, the moral of the story is everyone should go watch Andor.
Our new tagline.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are all the villains that I could think of from some of the more major storylines that seemed connected to Anakin thematically. We will be discussing some more villains next month that have next to no connection to Anakin.
Ultimately, pretty much most of the villains, all the roads to them, they lead to Anakin. You tie it back far enough.
Yep.
Would you guys like a goat fact this evening?
Yes, please.
This beautiful day. Goat meat is one of the most consumed meat per capita worldwide.
Really?
Interesting.
I've never eaten goat.
I've had goat a couple times in like Greek food.
Oh, I feel like I've had it in Indian.
Interesting. Is it good?
Yeah.
Maybe I have had goat. Hang on. I'm having a crisis.
It's not my favorite, but it's not bad.
Interesting.
It's not bad.
But yeah, there's a lot of cultures in some of the biggest populations in the world who very much do eat goat.
No, and I
regularly.
love that for them.
So
Yeah.
that does not shock me that it's eaten quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Fun goat fact for you all.
Thank you.
I decided to go with a more tragic one since we were talking about villains.
That was much darker than the other goat facts. Our intro and outro music is Mos Eisley Cantina by Speedkicks. Angela and I edit, our artwork is by me, and Sugar is our writer and researcher. You can find us on Instagram and Tumblr at Unleash the Goats. Thanks for listening.